Since 2000, Vietnam has made impressive progress towards achieving the Millennium Development Goals, or MDGs. As of August 2015, the country has achieved the MDGs on poverty reduction, education, gender equality, and maternal health. Huge progress has also been made towards achieving the MDG on reducing child mortality, according to the United Nations in Vietnam. In detail, Vietnam has brought its poverty rate down by nearly 7 times, achieved universal primary education and gender equality in access to education and labor force. However, there are some concerns about the sustainability of Vietnam's success, the road to complete the unfinished work on MDGs, and in implementing the post-2015 Sustainable Development Goals. Mr. Yusuf Abdul Jalil, thank you for joining us in our today's talks. And the first question, can you give us a brief assessment of Vietnam's results in implementing the Millennium Development Goals in the past years?
First, I would have to say that Vietnam has done a remarkable achievement in the framework of the Millennium Agenda. And a lot of countries have envy in relation to the scorecard of Vietnam in this regard. And I would like to give a couple of examples. Vietnam has done remarkable work in terms of bringing children to primary education, almost universal primary education, with major narrowing of gaps in terms of gender differences. And also I would say that there has been a major growth that has benefited most of the population and has propelled Vietnam to be a middle-income country. Having said that, there is an unfinished agenda, and the unfinished agenda is serious, and it relates to some widening gaps that exist between urban and rural, between ethnic minorities and king majorities, and between people with disabilities and the rest of the population.
According to the United Nations final MDG report, the Millennium Development Goals have produced the most successful anti-poverty movement in history and will serve as the jumping-off point for the new Sustainable Development Agenda to be adopted this year. All countries' determination to realize the Sustainable Development Goals was reflected in the 132nd Inter-Parliamentary Union Assembly in Hanoi last March and the 4th World Conference of Speakers of Parliament in New York last week.
We have 17 Sustainable Development Goals, so we have delegated tasks to different committees of the legislature. For example, the Financial Committee needs to submit the national budget proposal. The Agriculture Committee's goal is to double agricultural yield in 5 years. All committees will need to consider sustainable development.
Based on the momentum of the MDGs, the new 17 global goals are expected to break fresh ground with ambition on economic growth, climate change mitigation, cities and human settlements, industrialization, peace and justice, amongst others. So Vietnam is aiming to implement the Sustainable Development Goals in the coming years. Do you have any comments on Vietnam's plans and policies to implement the SDGs? And what should Vietnam do to maintain its MDGs achievements in the past years and to realize the SDGs in the coming years, which are quite ambitious?
I'm delighted to hear the declaration of the Chairman of the National Assembly, Nguyen Sinh Hum, which is a very momentous declaration because we are now at the junction between the MDGs with the unfinished agenda that I have talked about and the SDGs. And I would say in this case, what we need to do first is to build on the data that we have regarding all the inequities. Like, for example, UNICEF just launched with the government of Vietnam a landmark survey called the Multiple Indicator Cluster Survey, which is the 5th one we have actually organized here since 1996. And it is showing where the gaps are. So the government of Vietnam could use those results in order to tackle this unfinished agenda. And I would say another area which is important in the SDGs is expanded partnership. Partnership with the communities where the vulnerable populations are, with the private sector, because the private sector is not only source of corporate social responsibility, but also source of knowledge and innovation.
Thank you for joining us in our today's interview.
Thank you very much for this opportunity.